Who got you flowers?
Who got you those flowers, Kara? Eduardo Bersi asked, his voice a low, rhythmic growl like an idling engine as he stood over my desk, holding the card that read, "See you Saturday night." And I realized Manhattan's most dangerous man wasn't asking out of professional concern. The way his jaw clenched while gripping that innocent piece of cardstock told me the head of the Bersi syndicate was about to lose control over a bouquet of peonies meant for someone else. Welcome back, my beautiful souls and kindred spirits. Before we start, go ahead and subscribe, like, and share where you're watching from. It always warms my heart to see our little storytelling family stretch across the world. Every click, every comment, every bit of love you give helps us keep uncovering these unforgettable stories together. So find your quiet place, settle in, and let me take you somewhere you've never been before. Zendia Coleman was adjusting the blush-pink peonies on her desk when she felt his presence shift the air in the room. The flowers were extravagant, sprawling clusters of soft petals arranged with the kind of European elegance that spoke of old money and careful intention. They'd arrived 40 minutes ago, delivered by a courier who'd made her sign 3 separate forms like they were classified documents. And maybe, in this building, they were. The card tucked between the blooms had made her smile, something she'd trained herself not to do in the glacial silence of Eduardo Bersi's outer office. She reached out to straighten one of the stems, her fingers careful on the delicate petals. The cream silk of her blouse caught the late afternoon light filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Manhattan spread out behind her, 73 stories below, glittering and ruthless. She felt lighter than she had in months. That's when his office door opened. Zendia looked up, her small smile still in place, and felt it crystallize on her face. Eduardo Bersi stood in the doorway, perfectly still. He was dressed in one of his immaculate Italian suits, charcoal gray today, cut so precisely it looked like it had been designed specifically to intimidate. His dark hair was styled with the kind of effortless perfection that probably cost more than her monthly rent. At 34, he had the kind of face that belonged in Renaissance paintings. Sharp cheekbones, a jaw that could cut glass, olive skin, and eyes the color of espresso in low light, features that would have been beautiful if they weren't currently arranged into an expression she'd never seen before. Right now, those features were locked in something between control and chaos. His eyes were on the flowers. Not on her, on the flowers. "Mr. Bersi," she said, her voice coming out steadier than she felt. "Did you need something?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he moved toward her desk with slow, deliberate steps. Each footfall was silent on the imported Italian marble, but Zendia felt every one like a tremor in her chest. His hands were in his pockets, never a good sign. Eduardo Bersi only put his hands in his pockets when he was trying to keep them from doing something he'd regret. When he reached her desk, he stopped. His eyes were still fixed on the bouquet. "Who got you those flowers?" His voice was soft, dangerously soft. The kind of soft that preceded violence in the stories she'd heard whispered by the security team. The kind of soft that made grown men in the real estate world cancel meetings and leave the state. Zendia blinked. "I'm sorry." "The flowers." He gestured toward them with one hand, the movement precise and controlled. Everything about Eduardo Bersi was precise and controlled. He'd built an empire on precision and control. "Who sent them?" She glanced at the peonies, then back at him, trying to understand why the temperature in the room had dropped 15 degrees. "A friend." "Why?" His expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Something dark and possessive that had no business existing between a boss and his executive assistant. "A friend," he repeated, his Italian accent sharpening the edges of the words. He pulled the card from between the stems with 2 fingers, holding it up like evidence at a trial. "See you Saturday night." He read it aloud, each syllable deliberate. "This friend, does he have a name?" And that's when Zendia Coleman realized 2 things simultaneously. First, that the 3 rules she'd lived by for 2 years. Never ask about the midnight deliveries, keep his ristretto at exactly 95 degrees C, and never let him see inside her personal life, had just shattered like the glass walls surrounding them. And second, that Eduardo Bersi, the man who'd once negotiated a $50 million merger without blinking, who'd stared down federal investigators with a smile, who'd built a criminal empire while wearing Tom Ford and drinking espresso, was unraveling over a bouquet of flowers that weren't from him. His hands trembled slightly as he set the card down on her desk. Manhattan's most feared man was jealous, and Zendia had absolutely no idea what came next. Eduardo Bersi had never been a man who paced. Packing was for anxious men, desperate men, men who didn't own half of Manhattan and 3 shipping ports in Sicily. Yet here he was at 11 o'clock on a Friday night, wearing a path into the Persian rug of his penthouse, his phone clutched in his hand like a lifeline. The whiskey in his glass had gone warm an hour ago. On the screen, Zendia's Instagram story glowed in the darkness. She'd posted 20 minutes ago a photo of a candlelit table at some Brooklyn bistro he'd never heard of. The kind of place with exposed brick and overpriced small plates. Her hand was visible in the corner of the frame, elegant fingers wrapped around a wine glass, and across from her, slightly out of focus, was a man's shoulder. Just a shoulder, navy blazer, white shirt collar. Eduardo refreshed the page. Nothing new. He opened the location services app his head of security had installed on her company phone. For emergencies, he'd told himself. For protection. The Bersi name attracted enemies, and Zendia was close enough to him to be considered leverage. That's what he'd told himself. The blue dot that represented her pulsed on the map, still at the restaurant, still with him. Eduardo threw back the whiskey and immediately poured another. He pulled up her LinkedIn profile next, scrolling through her connections with the kind of manic focus he usually reserved for hostile takeovers. 247 professional contacts. How many of them were men? How many had sent her flowers before? His thumb hovered over the Messages app. He could text her. Something casual. Something about Monday's presentation with the Tokyo investors. Something that would remind her that her boss, that he was thinking about her while she was out there laughing at another man's jokes. Instead, he switched back to Instagram. She'd posted again. This time it was a boomerang of her laughing, head thrown back, the candlelight catching in her eyes. The caption read, "Sometimes you need to remember what joy feels like." Joy. She looked joyful. Eduardo set his phone face down on the marble counter and gripped the edge until his knuckles went white. Somewhere in the rational part of his brain, the part that had built an empire, that negotiated with senators and drug lords with equal ease, he knew this was insane. But the irrational part, the part that had been obsessed with his assistant for 2 years, wanted to know the name of the man making her smile. And then he wanted to destroy him. Monday morning arrived with dark clouds over Manhattan and Eduardo Bersi sitting at the head of the boardroom table like a king, preparing for an execution. Zendia had known something was wrong the moment she'd walked into the office. His door was open, never a good sign, and Maria from accounting had whispered that he'd been there since 6 a.m., canceling meetings with the kind of cold precision that made assistants cry and executives reschedule their flights. "Ms. Coleman," his voice carried through the open door. "The boardroom now." She'd grabbed her tablet and coffee, straightening her spine the way she always did before walking into his storms. 2 years had taught her that showing fear was the same as bleeding in shark-infested waters. He was standing when she entered, silhouetted against the floor-to-ceiling windows, hands clasped behind his back. The posture of a man barely containing violence. "Close the door." She did. "Sit." She remained standing. Small rebellions were all she had. His jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. Instead, he pulled out his phone and set it on the glossy table between them. The screen showed a photograph, her photograph, from Saturday night, laughing at that bistro in Brooklyn. Her blood went cold. "I'm going to need an accounting of your weekend," he said, his voice perfectly calm, perfectly terrifying. "Starting with Saturday at 7:43 p.m. when you arrived at a restaurant in Brooklyn that's not on any of your usual routes." "You tracked me." The words came out sharper than she'd intended. "I monitor all company phones for security purposes. You know this." He swiped to another photo, her walking down a tree-lined street, her companion's face just barely visible. "Who is he?" "That's none of your business." "Everything about you is my business, Kara." The endearment sounded like a threat. "You work for me. You carry my secrets. You have access to information that could dismantle everything I've built." He leaned forward, palms flat on the table. "So when my executive assistant spends her Saturday night with a strange man in Brooklyn, entertaining God knows what kind of pillow talk, I make it my business." "His name is Dante. He's a childhood friend. We had dinner." Her voice was shaking now, fury replacing fear. "And the only person violating boundaries here is you." "Boundaries?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You want to talk about boundaries? You've been driving me insane for 2 years, Zendaya. 2 years of watching you walk through that door every morning, knowing I can't touch you, knowing you're not mine." The confession hung in the air like smoke. "And now," he continued, his voice dropping to something raw and dangerous, "someone else gets to make you smile like that." Isabella Bercy arrived on Tuesday like a warning shot, wrapped in Valentino. Zendaya heard her before she saw her, the distinctive click of Laubautins on marble, followed by rapid Italian that made the security guards straighten their spines. Then she appeared in the doorway of Eduardo's outer office, all cascading dark hair and Mediterranean beauty, wearing a crimson dress that probably cost more than Zendaya's car. "You must be Zendaya," she said, her accent thick and musical. "I've heard so much about you." Before Zendaya could respond, Eduardo's door opened. His face transformed in a way she'd never seen, softening into something almost tender as he crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled the woman into his arms. They spoke in rapid Sicilian, his hand on the small of her back, her fingers touching his face with an intimacy that made Zendaya's chest constrict. "Zendaya," Eduardo said, not looking at her, "this is Isabella. She'll be consulting on the Morty acquisition as our strategic advisor." Strategic advisor, right. For the next 3 days, Zendaya watched them through the glass walls of his office, watched Isabella perch on the edge of his desk while he reviewed contracts, her hand on his shoulder. Watched them share lunch, her feeding him bites of pasta while laughing at some private joke. Watched him lean in close to whisper in her ear, his lips nearly brushing her temple. And every time Zendaya brought in documents or coffee, they'd switch to Italian, leaving her standing there like a servant dismissed from the conversation. Wednesday afternoon was the worst. Isabella had worn white, angelic and devastating, and when Zendaya entered to deliver the Tokyo reports, she found them standing by the window, Eduardo's jacket draped over Isabella's shoulders against the air conditioning. "Sei sempre stato mio," Isabella murmured, her fingers straightening his tie. Zendaya didn't speak Italian, but she understood possession when she heard it. That evening, she drafted her resignation letter. 2 years of professional distance, of carefully maintained boundaries, of convincing herself that the way he looked at her meant nothing, all of it shattered by 3 days of watching him with someone who fit into his world in a way she never could. She was American, self-made, an outsider playing in a game where blood and legacy were currency. Isabella was Sicilian royalty, speaking his language, understanding his world, touching him with the casual ownership of someone who belonged. Zendia had never hated anyone before. Now she understood why Eduardo had tracked her to Brooklyn. This burning, irrational fury, this was jealousy. And it was destroying her. Zendia placed the resignation letter on his desk at 6 p.m. on Thursday, when Isabella had finally left for the evening. "What is this?" Eduardo didn't look up from his laptop. 2 weeks' notice, effective immediately if you'll allow it. Now he looked up. His eyes were dark, unreadable. "No. I'm not asking for permission." "Then you misunderstand the nature of our arrangement." He closed the laptop with deliberate calm. "Sit down, Zendaya." "I'd rather stand." "I said sit." The command in his voice made her knees weak, but she refused to obey. He stood instead, moving around the desk with predatory grace. "Is this about Isabella?" "This is about me choosing to work somewhere I'm not tortured daily." "Tortured?" He laughed, and the sound was bitter. "You want to talk about torture? Do you have any idea what the last 3 days have cost me? Watching you watch us. Seeing that look in your eyes every time she touched me. I don't know what you're." "She's my cousin, Zendaya." The words cut through the room like a blade. "Isabella is my father's brother's daughter. She's married to a diplomat in Rome and has 3 children." The floor seemed to tilt beneath her feet. "You what?" "I brought her here to make you jealous." He took another step closer, and she could smell his cologne, could see the exhaustion in his eyes. "I spent Friday night stalking your Instagram like a lovesick teenager. I tracked your location. I hauled you into that boardroom like a jealous husband. And when none of it worked, when you just looked at me with those cold, professional eyes, I called in my cousin and asked her to pretend." Zendia couldn't find words. "That's insane." "Yes." He reached for her hand, and she was too shocked to pull away. "It's insane. I'm insane. You've made me insane, Kara. 2 years of wanting you, of watching you leave every evening and wondering who gets to see you smile, who gets to hear you laugh, who gets to know the woman behind the steel walls you've built." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "So yes, I brought Isabella here to make you feel a fraction of the hell I feel every time you're not mine. And judging by the fury in your eyes for 3 days." He pulled her closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "It worked." They ended up at his penthouse, because the office felt too exposed, too full of glass walls and security cameras, and the weight of professional propriety they'd clung to for 24 months. Zendaya stood by the windows overlooking Central Park, her reflection ghostly in the darkened glass. Behind her, Eduardo poured 2 glasses of wine with hands that were finally steady. "Milan," he said quietly. "The Rossi merger, do you remember?" She closed her eyes. "The rain. You were soaked. Your taxi hadn't come, and you were standing outside the hotel trying to call another one." He handed her the wine, their fingers brushing. "I offered you my umbrella, and you looked at me like I'd offered you poison." "Because I knew." Her voice cracked. "I knew if I got in that car with you, if we sat close enough that I could feel the heat coming off your skin, smell your cologne in that confined space." "What?" He turned her to face him. "What would have happened?" "I would have kissed you." The confession felt like jumping off a cliff. "And I would have lost everything I'd worked for." His jaw clenched. So you stood in the rain instead. So I stood in the rain. What about the elevator? He took a step closer. 3 months ago, the power went out and we were stuck between floors for 17 minutes. Zendaya's breath caught. She remembered. God, she remembered every second. The emergency lights casting shadows across his face. The way he'd loosened his tie. How small the space had felt with both of them breathing the same air. You asked me if I was afraid of confined spaces, she whispered. And you said you were afraid of something else entirely. His hand came up to cup her face. What were you afraid of, Kara? I was afraid of you. She leaned into his touch despite herself. Afraid of wanting something I couldn't have. Afraid that if I let myself feel what I was feeling, I'd become just another woman who fell for her boss and lost herself in the process. And now I'm terrified. She set down her wine glass with shaking hands. Because I've spent 2 years building walls to keep you out, and you just demolished them in a week with flowers and jealousy and your cousin in a red dress. He smiled then, really smiled, and it transformed his face. Good, because I've been terrified for 2 years. Then he kissed her, and the silence finally broke. They'd made it 3 weeks. 3 weeks of stolen kisses in his office after hours. 3 weeks of her sleeping in his penthouse, waking up to find him watching her like she might disappear. 3 weeks of pretending the outside world didn't exist. The restaurant was his choice, a private room at Mafia, where the chef knew to serve them without interruption and the security was supposedly airtight. Zendaya wore the emerald dress he'd delivered that morning, and Eduardo couldn't stop touching her hand across the table. I want to tell people, he said, refilling her wine. I'm tired of hiding you. Your enemies will. My enemies already know everything worth knowing. His thumb stroked her wrist. Let me claim you publicly, Kara. Let me show the world you're mine. She was about to answer when the lights went out. Eduardo moved before she could scream. 1 second he was across the table, the next he was pulling her to the floor, his body covering hers as gunfire shattered the windows. Glass rained down around them, and she felt him flinch as something grazed his shoulder. Stay down. His voice was completely different, cold, controlled, lethal. Nothing like the man who'd been holding her hand seconds ago. The door burst open. 3 men in black, guns raised. Eduardo was faster. He moved like violence incarnate, disarming the first man with brutal efficiency and using his weapon to drop the second. The third got a shot off that went wide, and Eduardo closed the distance between them with terrifying speed. Zendaya watched him break the man's arm with his bare hands. Then Marco, his head of security, was there with 6 more men, and the attackers were being dragged away. Eduardo turned back to her, blood on his shirt, his and theirs, and for the first time she saw the monster everyone whispered about. Are you hurt? He pulled her up, hands running over her frantically, checking for injuries. She couldn't speak, could only stare at the man who just killed for her without hesitation. Gardami, he commanded, forcing her to meet his eyes. Look at me, are you hurt? No, her voice was barely a whisper. Eduardo, what? Morty, he spat the name like poison. Lorenzo Morty just declared war. He pulled her against his chest, his heart hammering against her ear. And he used you to do it. His phone buzzed. He read the message, and his expression went glacial. They want to negotiate. They're offering peace if I give you up. He looked at her with eyes that burned. So I'm going to burn his empire to the ground instead. The Bercy Foundation Gala was in 3 days, and every security expert Eduardo employed was begging him to cancel. Zendaya listened to them argue in his penthouse study, Marco insisting it was a trap, his legal counsel warning about exposure. even Isabella calling from Rome to say this was madness. Through it all, Eduardo sat silent, his jaw tight, staring at the guest list like it was a battle plan. Because it was. "I'll go," Zendia said from the doorway. Every head turned. "Absolutely not." Eduardo stood, his voice final. "You're staying here where it's safe. I'll have 20 men." "No." She walked into the room with her spine straight, channeling every ounce of strength she'd built in 2 years of surviving his world. "You said you wanted to claim me publicly, so claim me. Let me walk in there on your arm and show Morty that I'm not hiding, that we're not hiding." "Kara, you don't understand what you're asking." "I understand perfectly." She moved closer, holding his gaze. "If I hide now, I'll be hiding forever. Every enemy you have will know that threatening me is how they get to you. But if I stand beside you at that gala," she touched his face, "then they'll know I'm not your weakness, I'm your strength." Marco muttered something in Italian that sounded like a prayer. Eduardo stared at her for a long moment, and she watched something shift in his expression, pride mixing with terror mixing with love. "You'll wear the diamonds," he said finally. "The ones from the vault, the Bercy stones that my grandmother wore." She understood what he was really saying. Those diamonds were a crown, a declaration, a promise. The night of the gala, she descended the penthouse stairs in a black gown that looked like liquid night, with diamonds at her throat that had belonged to Sicilian queens. Eduardo waited at the bottom in a tuxedo, and when he saw her, his breath caught. "You look like vengeance," he murmured, offering his arm. "Good," she replied, taking it. "That's what I'm going for." The car ride to the plaza was silent. When they arrived, photographers swarmed. Security held them back as Eduardo stepped out first, then turned to help her. The moment her hand touched his, flashbulbs exploded. And Zendaya Coleman, executive assistant turned queen, smiled for the cameras like she owned the city. Because tonight, walking into a room full of New York's elite and Manhattan's most dangerous criminals, she did. 2 years later, Zendia woke to sunlight streaming through the windows of their villa in Lake Como, and the sound of her daughter's laughter echoing from the garden below. Sophia Bercy was 11 months old and had her father's dark eyes and her mother's stubborn streak. Zendia could see them from the bedroom balcony. Eduardo sprawled on a blanket in the grass, their daughter crawling over him like he was a mountain to conquer, squealing every time he pretended to growl. The man who'd once tracked her to Brooklyn, who'd brought his cousin to make her jealous, who'd killed 3 men to protect her, was now being defeated by a toddler with drool on her chin. Zendaya's wedding ring caught the morning light as she leaned against the railing. White gold, with a single diamond that had belonged to his grandmother. He'd proposed 3 months after the gala, on a rooftop in Manhattan with half the city watching. The Morty threat had ended that same week. She didn't ask for details. Some things were better left in the darkness where Eduardo's other life lived. "Mama," Sophia's voice carried up, and Zendia watched Eduardo point toward the balcony, lifting their daughter so she could wave with chubby fists. When she came down, barefoot in his shirt, she found them in the garden he'd built for her. Acres of flowers, peonies and roses and lilies, arranged in careful chaos. No longer bouquets that arrived with questions attached, but a living promise that she never had to hide anything again. "She's been asking for you for an hour," Eduardo said, handing Sophia over. Their daughter immediately grabbed Zendaya's hair, babbling in a mix of English and Italian that made no sense but sounded like poetry. "You could have woken me." "You were tired." He kissed her temple, then Sophia's head. "My girls needed rest." My girls. 3 years ago, she'd been his assistant, keeping her life behind steel walls. Now she was his wife, the mother of his child, The woman who'd walked into a room full of criminals wearing his grandmother's diamonds and changed the entire game. I was thinking, Eduardo murmured against her hair while Sophia grabbed at his shirt. We should plant more roses, the yellow ones you mentioned last week. Zendaya smiled, watching her daughter try to eat a peony petal. No more hiding, she asked softly. He pulled them both closer, his empire and his heart contained in this sun-drenched moment. My piu, Kara, never again. Thank you for staying until the end. That means more than you think. If this story touched something inside you, subscribe, like, and tell me what you felt in the comments. I read every single one because this isn't just storytelling, it's connection. And if you're ready for the next journey, don't wander too far. The next story is already waiting in the dark.